Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. You caught me mid-tweet. I like to keep my Twitter followers enraged. Stacy.
I thought you were going to say scared. Well, I want to talk about corruption because, as we all have seen in the past week or two, that we went through the looking glass in many regards, the corruption, the global financial system, monetary system, the negative rates, and all that sort of stuff. But when this Jeffrey Epstein, suicide situation happened, it was quite remarkable that the universal opinion, immediately at least, until people started filtering themselves, but immediately there were the likes of Washington Post and New York Times and NBC sort of journalists on Twitter scaring the population, going, oh my God, the guy was murdered, So then they all said, oh, it's all a conspiracy theory. But the fact is that this could happen, that the corrupt people he was blackmailing, perhaps, we'll never know what truly was the whole story behind the situation of Jeffrey Epstein. But because now conveniently, all of the revelations will no longer happen. So I want to talk about the corruption that we see all around us. Now, since 2008, when Barack Obama was elected and came to the rescue of the global financial system and offered hope to the American people that something would change, nothing has ever changed. That it was never help for the people. It was never help for the population. It was always engineering bailouts for the elite, for the connected, for the powerful. Just as the suicide of Jeffrey Epstein was a bailout for very powerful people as well. Here we see U.S. credit card interest rates hit highest level in 25 years as economy slows, Fed eases. The gap between what banks are being charged to borrow money and what they're charging customers is widening once again. According to the FT, U.S. consumers are paying higher interest rates on credit card balances than they have in 25 years. The average rate on interest-bearing card accounts topped 17% in May, according to the Fed data, the highest in the 25 years that the central bank has been making the calculations. Weekly data based on creditcards.com survey of 100 national card issuers found an average rate of 17.8% at the end of July, another multi-decade high.
Right. It's proof that it's not a market-driven economy. It's not a competition-driven economy. It's not capitalism. This is a top-down dictatorship run by banks who can say that they're going to give their friends on Wall Street negative interest rates, or they'll pay them for putting deposits at the central bank, where at the same time they will jack the credit card rates up on people who don't have special relationships with the special bank. So interest rates are gapping, the spread is widening, and what I call interest rate apartheid. If you're in the wrong side of the friends of Jeffrey Epstein, you end up in a Bantustan of extortionary credit card rates. If you're a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, then you get the insider rate of negative, and you get paid to lend money or to borrow money, excuse me, from the bank. Interest rates are classically expected to trade in tandem. So you have your base rate from the central bank, your margin rate, your CD rate, your credit card rate, and they run and they trade in a relationship with each other that has a classical relationship that you can bank on, you can define. I was amused quite dramatically, if that's the right phrase, by Joe Wiesenthal writing on Bloomberg how negative interest rates are not abnormal, failing to recognize this extraordinary bifurcation in the credit card rate and the Fed funds rate. That's a classic propagandist and apologist for this type of corruption.
And Joe Wiesenthal, with all due respect, he's not somebody like Dr. Michael Hudson, who's actually an economist and historian, and who has told us that negative rates has never been seen, at least since back to the Bronze Age when his studies end. But here as well is in terms of propaganda, a lot of the mainstream media will say, that it's no time to be an academic. The Fed needs to cut rates. We need to save the people. And remember that those people that you see on the cable news, they are earning 10, 15, 20 million dollars. They do live in New York City, and their friends are fellow Manhattanites, and they are the elite, and anybody's only going to care mostly about their friends. So those are their friends. The Jeffrey Epsteins are their friends, and you could see all the photos of them hanging out with that sort of guy. So that they're going to bail out their friends, and they might make themselves feel better about it by wearing like a pink ribbon or a yellow ribbon, or saying, oh, it's for the greater good of you people out there. But in fact, as we see, that there's this huge gap between what banks can borrow at and what they're lending at. Now, some of it is that wealth sort of confiscation and wealth transfer. So the poor schlub who can't pay off their credit card debt, and it's going to be the younger millennial sorts who are in college or university and think that because they've been propagandized that they have to do that, they have to take out a $100,000 loan to get what will become a more and more useless degree, let's put it that way. And then they have to live on credit cards in order to feed themselves while doing their studies. But the mortgage rates have gone down. So mortgage rates, because remember what we pointed out is that the entire banking system is not about lending to businesses and growing the economy and blah, 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 all that propaganda. It's about mortgages and encouraging speculation and greater fools.
Absolutely. In 2008, the global economy, like Epstein, died. And like Epstein, it started to stink really bad. And like Epstein, instead of performing an autopsy and telling the people exactly how the global economy died in 2008, the global bankers simply took a lot of propaganda and put it into the system to hide the stench. Like they're not doing an autopsy or releasing the results on Epstein. In 2008, it was to save the bankers, to bail out the bankers, and like Epstein, to bail out his political friends. They were simply unwilling to let the stink of a dead corpse, in one case Epstein, and in one case the global economy in 2008, filter into the reality in a way that people would react. People should have reacted in 2008 by taking serious actions against the bankers who perpetrated a massive fraud, like they did in Iceland. As we've been talking about Iceland, they put some in jail.
It was a bait and switch because in 2008, the people did want something to be done. That's why they voted for hope and change. They wanted change. They had some hope that things could change and justice could be done. Instead, Obama came in, brought in all the Rubenites, all the Robert Rubin's trainees and lackeys like Tim Geithner and Larry Summers, and brought those guys in. Then he said, actually, we need to look forward, not back. Don't look at all the crimes that have happened. And here we have it, like the credit card rates for ordinary Americans is that. Here's another article from earlier in this year, late last year, just to point out how we coddle a certain sector. There's justice for, one ordinary person, like would have never been offered the deal that Jeffrey Epstein had basically been given almost immunity. He did some time in a Palm Beach jail where he just had to stay there for the night and work during the day. He was released during the day, remember? So there was something corrupt that happened between Jeffrey Epstein, we'll never probably know, and the Department of Justice and the Attorney General's offices in Florida and New York. But here is what happens with banks. So the Fed paid banks $30 billion on excess reserves for 2017. We've covered this before, but just to remind you that banks are borrowing from the Fed for free, and they're lending to American credit card holders at the highest rate in 25 years, even though interest rates and bond yields are at like 3,000-year lows, as you pointed out in the previous episode. The Fed pays the banks interest on their required reserves and on their excess reserves at the Fed. Excess reserves are the biggie. As a result of QE, these excess reserves jumped from $1.7 billion in July of 2008 to $2.7 trillion at the peak in September 2014. They've since dwindled, if that's the right word, to $2.2 trillion. And here's the chart of the excess reserves.
Those are the embalming fluids and the formaldehyde that keep the dead corpse of the global banking system alive for 10 years. Like they would inject Epstein's corpse with some kind of embalming fluid or formaldehyde, and then the New York Times will insist that everyone in America should nourish themselves by nibbling on his embalmed fingers to sustain themselves in this time of trouble.
And so remember, Obama has said we need to look forward, not back. Of course, that's how injustice continues and perpetrates and trickles down. That's why, they looked forward, not back, with Jeffrey Epstein when he committed his heinous crimes with very powerful people and on behalf of very powerful people, including governors, senators, prime ministers.
Well, the Ponzi scheme of your brain, you build on the lie. And you take it to a new place, and you start referencing your own lies and misconceptions to create ever more elaborate lies and misconceptions as the media keeps coming up with this Russophobic blame game. But I'm sorry, I interrupted.
But
continue.
I want to continue on this story because remember in 2008 and 2009, the aftermath of the financial crash, we did have some show trials in Congress in order to absolve them and get, basically get the criminals off the hook. And we had the famous Goldman Sachs sacks of poop that they sold to our pension funds and defrauded pension funds, and nobody ever went to jail. There was nothing they could do. That's when Obama said we need to look forward, not back. Here, 17 Goldman Sachs bankers charged a multi-billion-dollar Malaysian fraud case. It's funny because on the tweet, they actually have one of the senior executives of Goldman Sachs at the time, a British guy who is now has been indicted, I guess, in Malaysia, and he's standing with George Osborne because, of course, George Osborne was the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the United Kingdom, and he intervened in the HSBC case here in America and got those guys off. So it's pointing out that these guys are also going to get off, I think, with the subtle reference there, George Osborne in that photo. 17 current and former Goldman Sachs bankers, including its most senior London-based executive, have been hit with criminal charges related to multi-billion-dollar Malaysian fraud case. The Malaysian Attorney General's office filed charges related to claims the country's government were defrauded out of billions of dollars in bond deals, some of which allegedly end up going to the film Wolf of Wall Street.
Right. Well, I'm sure Goldman will come out with a Jeffrey Epstein corpse collateralized mortgage obligation bond, and it'll end up in a lot of people's pension accounts who will then die. At least you're not frickin' Alec Baldwin, who tweeted that he believes that Epstein was murdered by Putin. How frickin' delusional do you have to be? If you're Alec Baldwin, there seems to be no limit. We'll be back after this break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser, continuing with Karl Denninger of market-ticker.org. Karl Denninger, of course, he applies his keen financial analyst mind to politics and approaches it, I would say, from the view of true political science. You just look at things kind of for what they are without, get the smoke out of the way. Karl, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Max.
All right, let's talk politics. In your opinion, do any of the Democratic candidates for president look like they could beat Trump?
No, in a word. I was trying to figure out where the sane one was in the first two debates, each of them over 2 nights. And what you have is a half dozen that are, at least from polling data, have some chance at getting the nomination. And then you have 15 that are indistinguishable from 0. So none of those 15 are going to be the nominee, absent something absolutely ridiculous happening. And the ones that are on the top are just as crazy as the ones at the bottom. So from the bottom up, you have the most insane sort of pronouncements coming because you have to do something in order to get yourself out of the gutter. And from the top, you're either trying to fight off one of the other front runners and parry their advances, or score a knockout blow on one of them and throw them back down in the bottom bin.
So let's say Karl Denninger is called in as a consultant, and they charge you with figuring out what parts of the Trump economic model can the Democrats hit. Like, where is he vulnerable if he has any vulnerabilities? So You know, if you were advising one of these people, how would you instruct them to hit him on an economic vulnerability if you see one, Karl?
Well, the biggest economic vulnerability is the attack that has been leveled on both the upper wage earner class, that is the people on the right side of the bell curve in America, and on the lower end. The problem with trying to attack the lower end, which is where the Democrat vote base tends to come from, is that if you do that, you have to go after the illegal immigration problem. And they're allergic to that. So that's a very difficult thing to do. On the top end, the other problem you have with that is that among highly educated people, where do you go there? And where the Democrats have gone thus far has been with trying to essentially forgive $1.5 trillion worth of college loans, which is fertile ground in terms of, you know, how do I buy votes, right? Tell somebody, well, I'm going to give you $200,000. That's a pretty good way to buy a vote. The problem with it is they can't pay for it. And then you get into the whole medical care situation because, again, another area of fertile ground for Democrat votes is senior citizens that are on fixed incomes. And yet you talk about Medicare for all and people start trying to total the numbers up on that, and it's insane. So, you know, I don't know where they go. What I would say is if you really wanted to attack this, the popular place to go is the 80% issue that neither political party wants to go after, and that is defanging the medical monopolies. You're going to immediately generate 20% of the population, which are the people that are making all the money doing this. They're going to hate you. And they're going to come at you with the pitchforks, the knives, the torches, and probably some road flares and try to burn your house. But the other 80% of the population would see, on average, a 10 to 20% real increase in their standard of living every year, and that's enormous.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We talk about this all the time on the Keiser Report. And I remember Hillary Clinton, actually, I think, tried this in the first term of Bill Clinton. And as you point out, she got attacked pretty viciously. And then the bond market came unglued, and Bill Clinton made the famous remark that when he comes back, he wants to come back as the bond market because that's where the real power is. And then it hasn't really been a viable issue since. You talk about not having enough money in the coffers to pay for our student loan forgiveness. Your thoughts on Andrew Yang? He's got the $1,000 a month UBI, Universal Basic Income concept. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you know, 330 million Americans, $1,000 a month. You know, what's the budget impact of doing that? What I always love is the answer to this that the Democrats always trot out is, well, we're going to tax the rich. Okay, and that's a very good selling point among the American population. The problem with it is it only works for 1 year, because if you turn around and you tell me that if I make more than $1 million a year, you're going to put a 90% marginal tax rate on me, then I'm going to make $999,000 next year. And when I get to $999, I'm going to stop working. I'm going to go to the beach. I'm going to drink Mai Tais. And you can't prevent me from doing that. So your tax collections will go to zero from this policy after the first 12 months. And yet the promise you made to keep paying the money, that's not going to go to zero. So what are you going to do with this?
Let's talk China. What do you think about the trade war with China? Are we shutting the barn door after the horse has bolted? Is it possible to ever restore manufacturing and innovation to America? Karl?
We're doing the right thing, but we're doing it the wrong way. I have long argued that we should have hit China and everybody else with wage and environmental parity tariffs. In fact, it was a central point in Leverage, the book that I wrote. And it is the right thing to do because paying people to offshore jobs by allowing them to abuse workers and poison the land is inherently an immoral and outrageous act. Okay, and yet that's what we've incentivized. So correcting that is the right thing to do. In addition, China is only quote unquote great because they have ripped off intellectual property on a wholesale basis for the last 30 years. So anything that tends to take some of the teeth out of that snake is good. The problem with what we're doing right now is that the factories are just moving to places like Vietnam and Indonesia. They're not coming back here to the United States. And that's because we haven't applied those tariffs on an equal basis to everybody. We're focused in one place. that is politically necessary for Trump in today's world, but in the long term, it doesn't actually solve the problem. What it will do, however, is destabilize China's banking and financial system, which it's about time they had a little comeuppance for trying to run a 400% debt to GDP ratio.
You know, Karl, you've got a background in telecommunications as well. Let me just ask a question. The rumor or the thought is that Huawei is now the leader in global telecom, and with their latest technology, the next generation mobile wireless technology, G5. Is that correct?
I don't buy it. Look, Huawei is certainly a global force. They certainly have a decent technology base. They ripped off an awful lot of it, but however you acquire it, you still have it once you have it, right? The thing is, they are by no means the only source for 5G telecom equipment in the world today. Might they be a little cheaper? Yes, but that's a different question than can you do it? Now we're just talking about margins, right? And so really when you get down to it, I don't see the threat there. And what I do think is interesting is that they're putting their own Android-like operating system out because Google is essentially blocked from being able to put Google apps on their stuff now. And that's very, very good from the Chinese Communist Party point of view because it'll make their surveillance of their citizens easier. From a standpoint of penetrating into the rest of the world, is worth zero.
Let's talk about Elizabeth Warren. She's got an antitrust rhetoric going on against Silicon Valley. Does the U.S. need a trust-busting president more than anything else at the moment, Karl?
Yes, but she's focused in the wrong place. There is a serious problem with companies like Amazon. There is a serious problem with companies like Facebook. Amazon's biggest miracle is bringing third-party sellers onto their platform that they then data mine, and if it's profitable enough, they cut them out of the market. That's illegal. It's been illegal for over 100 years. They've been documented to be doing it. And on top of that, the cross-subsidization of businesses between their cloud services and their physical goods, that's illegal too. But nobody goes to jail today. Where Elizabeth Warren could score big points is if she went to that 80-20 issue and went after the medical monopolies, because that is $3 trillion a year that gets ripped off out of American pocketbooks. That is an enormous amount of money. We're talking about somewhere on the order of $10,000 per citizen in the United States today that you'd keep. That would make a huge difference. And if she could actually be coherent about it, which I'm not convinced she could, is one that, frankly, I think could get her the White House.
Wow. Excellent point, Karl. I think that's going to be the most talked about part of the discussion. Let's move on to Tulsi Gabbard, running on an anti-war platform. The military and the many bases around the world eat up half of the U.S. budget. Do you think downsizing is a good idea, even if impossible, when the consensus on spending even more seems to be a bipartisan issue? Karl.
It's not half the budget. Come on, it's a sixth, okay? It's $700 and some billion. Should we cut that off? Yes. Is that going to solve the problem when between Medicare and Medicaid, it's going to be about $1.3 trillion this year? No. Can we have a defense budget of zero? No. Could we whack $100 billion or maybe $200 billion off of it by disengaging from places we never should have been in the first place? For example, Afghanistan? Yeah. And so that's a good set of policies. But if you look at the rest of what Tulsi has out there, it's lunacy, pie in the sky, voodoo nonsense, just like the rest of these folks. And so, trading on a war record, hey, that's nice, but guess what? She's not getting any impact there. The one thing she did do was really bend Kamala Harris over the table at the last debate and give it to her the hard way. That was one of those moments on TV that you go, oh boy, that one hurt. Short of a baseball bat, I don't know that she could have done better.
No nuance in that, Karl. It plays like it does now. So we've mentioned Elizabeth Warren, we've mentioned Andrew Yang, we've mentioned Tulsi Gabbard. In the minute we have left, I want to return to this concept, this idea you have, the 80-20 concept, because this is freaking awesome. We talk about it all the time. By going after the medical establishment, Americans get, as I think you said, 10 to 20% increase in standard of living, correct?
Well, yeah, and for people at the low end, it's even more. It would be about $10,000 per citizen.
Yeah, I mean, this is the way to go, and in the right hands, if articulated correctly, could put a Democrat in the White House. You know, you're no, you know, which do you think that's going to happen?
No, because you've got both sides of the aisle that are absolutely bought by the medical and pharmaceutical complex, and none of them will go anywhere near this. I've been trying to get this into the political realm. I've got a model bill for it for the last 7-8 years. It's gone absolutely nowhere.
So, Karl, before we go, what's the name of your book again?
Leverage, How Cheap Money Will Destroy the World.
Leverage, exactly. Great book. Hey, that's it. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our very special guest, Karl Denninger. He is over there at market-ticker.org. If you want to reach us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.